The words hung in the sterile air of my hospital room, a venomous cloud I couldn't escape even with the oxygen mask pressed to my face. Honestly, dear, you're just such a burden. A parasite, really. Draining everyone's resources while you lie there, doing nothing. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, delivered this pronouncement with a sigh that suggested profound personal inconvenience. Her tone was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a familiar melody in the symphony of my marital discord. My husband, Mark, sat beside me, his hand a cold weight on mine, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond my four-pole, a silent spectator to his mother's cruelty. He offered no defense, no protest. It was a tableau I'd witnessed countless times. My illness, a sudden, debilitating autoimmune flare, had confined me to weeks of grueling recovery, a period marked by pain, exhaustion, and a gnawing fear. And Eleanor, whose disdain for me was as constant as the sunrise, saw it not as a struggle for my life, but as an opportunity to highlight my perceived inadequacy. My normal, the life I had built with Mark before this, was a fragile construct, constantly under siege from Eleanor's thinly veiled disapproval. She never missed an opportunity to remind me, through implication or outright statement, that I wasn't good enough. Not smart enough, not accomplished enough, certainly not wealthy enough. She'd spent years subtly undermining me, making me question my own worth, all while parading her own perceived superiority. It was exhausting, a constant battle against a tide of negativity. This wasn't the first time Eleanor had made her feelings known. There was the time, years ago, when Mark and I were struggling to buy our first home. We'd pooled every penny, taken out a substantial loan, and were still short. Eleanor had offered a loan of a mere fraction of what we needed, but only if the house was in her name. The implication was clear: she would hold our security over our heads, a constant reminder of our dependence. We declined, of course, the sting of her manipulative offer a bitter pill. Then there was the inheritance from my own grandmother. A modest sum, but significant to me. Eleanor had made a point of mentioning, loudly, at Thanksgiving dinner, how sad it was that I would squander it on frivolous things, instead of investing it wisely, like she would. The thinly veiled accusation that I was irresponsible, that I lacked her superior financial acumen, was delivered with a triumphant smirk. These were not isolated incidents, they were chapters in a long, drawn-out narrative of her entitlement and my quiet suffering. My default setting had become endurance, a strategic retreat into my own thoughts, a silent weathering of her storms. I'd learned to let her words wash over me, to build internal walls, to keep my true feelings locked away, lest they become ammunition. But this time, in this hospital room, something shifted. The raw vulnerability of my condition, the sheer physical fight for breath and strength, stripped away the usual layers of polite endurance. Her accusation of being a parasite during my recovery, when I was literally fighting for my life and relying on others for basic care, felt like a betrayal of the deepest kind. It wasn't just about my pride anymore. It was about the fundamental lack of empathy, the sheer, unadulterated malice that lay beneath her saccharine exterior. The nurse had just stepped out, leaving us in the suffocating silence, broken only by the rhythmic beep of the machines monitoring my fading vitality. Eleanor was perched on the edge of a chair, her impeccably manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on her designer handbag. The light from the window, usually a comforting presence, seemed to illuminate the sharp angles of her face, making her look more hawk-like than ever. "You know," she continued, her voice laced with a false sweetness, "this is all so terribly inconvenient. The medical bills are astronomical, and Mark is already so stressed. Honestly, dear, one would think you'd make more of an effort to get better, quickly." She paused, letting her words sink in, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "We all have our financial burdens, but some are more deserved than others, wouldn't you agree?" The word parasite echoed in my mind, each syllable a tiny shard of ice. I looked at Mark, his face a mask of passive resignation. In that moment, the carefully constructed walls I'd built around my resentment began to crumble. I was tired. Tired of the subtle digs, the constant judgment, the insinuation that I was less than. Tired of being the villain in her fabricated narrative. My recovery wasn't just about regaining my physical strength, it was about reclaiming my dignity. And Eleanor's venomous pronouncement had just provided the impetus. A cold, quiet resolve settled over me. It wasn't a sudden burst of anger, but a deliberate, calculated decision. The following weeks were a blur of physical therapy, medication adjustments, and an unwavering focus on healing. Eleanor's visits dwindled, her presence too draining, even for her. She'd made her point, and clearly felt her duty was done. I, however, was far from done. I spent hours on my laptop, my fingers clumsy at first, then regaining their familiar agility. I meticulously gathered documents, scanned old emails, and unearthed forgotten agreements. My illness had given me an enforced period of reflection, and within that stillness, a plan had germinated. It wasn't born of malice, but of a deep-seated need for balance, for a quiet, undeniable assertion of truth. The day I was discharged, I walked out of the hospital not as a frail invalid, but as someone with a purpose. The air outside felt crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of my illness. I drove straight home, not to rest, but to work. I meticulously organized the files, each document a testament to Eleanor's meticulous financial maneuvering over the years. The crucial piece was the separate business venture Eleanor and Mark's father had started years ago, a lucrative real estate development. I'd always known about it, but it was presented as something Mark's father handled, and Eleanor was merely a silent partner. What I uncovered, however, was the full extent of her control, the layers of shell corporations and nominee accounts she had established to shield her profits and, more importantly, to maintain a public image of financial prudence. My own personal investments, built over years of diligent saving and calculated risks, were dwarfed by the scale of her empire, an empire she'd built on her husband's initial capital and then systematically expanded, all while portraying herself as a benevolent matriarch. The following month was dedicated to the execution of my plan. It was a silent operation, carried out with the precision of a surgeon. I didn't confront Eleanor. I didn't leave angry voicemails. I simply acted. I contacted a discreet financial lawyer, someone known for handling complex asset divisions and discrete settlements. We worked through the details, ensuring every legal avenue was explored and every clause meticulously drafted. It was a slow, deliberate process, requiring patience and an unwavering focus. I knew Eleanor was used to steamrolling over people, to making demands and expecting them to be met. This was the antithesis of her approach. The appointed day arrived. It was a Saturday, the kind of day Eleanor usually reserved for lavish brunches and polite societal gatherings. Mark was at home, still recovering himself from the stress of my illness and his mother's constant presence. I asked him to invite Eleanor over for lunch, a casual affair. He agreed, oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. When Eleanor arrived, she was her usual immaculately dressed self, a halo of expensive perfume preceding her. She greeted me with a tight smile, her eyes appraising my recovered health with a flicker of something that might have been surprise, quickly masked by her practiced indifference. We sat at the dining table, a tense silence punctuated by the clinking of silverware. The conversation was stilted, superficial. Then, as the dessert plates were cleared, I reached into my briefcase. I placed a single, crisp document on the polished mahogany. It wasn't a lengthy contract, but a summary of findings, a cold, irrefutable ledger. Eleanor, I began, my voice calm, steady, I've been doing some research. I gestured to the paper. It seems the business venture you and Mark's father started, the one where you were supposedly the silent partner, was quite successful. Her manicured hand stilled, mid-reach for her water glass. What are you implying, dear? Her tone was laced with a familiar condescension, but there was a subtle tremor beneath it. I'm not implying anything, I said, my gaze unwavering. I'm stating facts. This document outlines the true value of that venture, not as it was presented, but as it has grown under your sole management. And it also outlines my claim. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched. Your claim? And what, pray tell, is your claim? Her voice dripped with a practiced amusement, as if I were a child making an absurd demand. My claim, I repeated, pushing the document a fraction closer to her, is on the fees. The management fees, the consultancy fees, the operational fees, the finder's fees, all the various fees you've been extracting from that enterprise for the past 15 years. Fees that were paid out of the profits generated by Mark's father's initial investment, and by extension, what should have been Mark's inheritance. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. I've calculated them. With interest. And considering your recent pronouncements about me being a burden and a parasite, I felt it only fair to ensure those burdens were adequately compensated. The color drained from Eleanor's face, leaving her skin a waxy pallor. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, darted from the document to my face, a flicker of genuine panic finally breaking through. The smugness, the entitlement, the carefully constructed facade, it all began to crack. Her perfectly formed lips parted, but no sound emerged. She looked at the document, then at me, and for the first time, I saw not contempt, but a dawning horror. The quiet execution was complete. The aftermath was swift and brutal, though not in the way Eleanor would have understood. My phone began to buzz incessantly. Texts from Mark's aunt, his cousins, all demanding to know what was happening, what I had done. Flying monkeys, as they were so aptly called. They were armed with Eleanor's distorted version of events, that I was trying to extort money, that I was unhinged, that I was deliberately trying to ruin her. Mark, bless his well-meaning heart, was caught in the middle, trying to placate everyone, his voice laced with a bewildered confusion. Eleanor, of course, did not take this lying down. She launched a furious campaign, weaving tales of my supposed greed and manipulative tactics to anyone who would listen. Her social circle, a carefully curated collection of individuals who thrived on gossip and judgment, was a fertile ground for her narrative. But the foundation of her power, her meticulously crafted image of the financially astute matriarch, had been irrevocably shaken. The document I presented wasn't just a statement of claims, it was a meticulous breakdown of her financial dealings, a roadmap to her avarice, all backed by irrefutable evidence. My lawyer, with quiet efficiency, had already filed the necessary paperwork, initiating a legal process that threatened to expose the full extent of her financial machinations. She'd underestimated me. She'd seen my illness, my vulnerability, and assumed I was broken. She'd mistaken my quiet endurance for weakness. But in that forced stillness, I had found my strength, my clarity. The satisfaction wasn't in her downfall, not exactly. It was in the quiet dismantling of her narrative, the stripping away of her entitlement. It was in seeing the look on her face, the moment the illusion shattered, the moment she realized her carefully constructed world was about to crumble, not because I had yelled, or threatened, or pleaded, but because I had simply presented the truth, backed by undeniable facts. She had called me a parasite, but in the end, it was her own insatiable greed that had consumed her. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound.